Shalom, shalom. Welcome again to What Up with Gloria. I hope everybody's well and I hope everybody is keeping safe. Amen and amen. Oh, let me take the time first and foremost to welcome those people that are joining us for the very first time. If this is your first time here, I welcome you. And to my returning Word gang, you know that you're always welcome here. Thank you and God bless. Amen and amen. About a year ago, I did a video on understanding times and seasons. Understanding times and seasons. And we talked about why it's important for us to discern and understand the times and the seasons. And we heard about how the sons of Issachar understood the times and seasons. And because of that, they were able to know what they needed to do. So it's very, very critical in this journey of purpose for you to know the times and the seasons of God. But as important as that is, it's also very, very critical for you to understand the place of your placement. You need to understand, it's important for you to understand the timing and the seasons, but it's also very important for you to understand and know the place where you ought to be, the place that God has commissioned for you to operate from. Amen and amen. If you know the times and the seasons, but you don't understand where you ought to be, you will find yourself out of alignment because you will be in the wrong place at the right time. But when you understand where you ought to be, you will always be in the right place and the right time. Amen and amen. When we look at people like Abraham, we understand and we know that God called Abraham out of his country. Now, God is almighty and he's able to use anybody at any place. God can use you anywhere, but he chose to call Abraham out. And even though we don't fully understand why, it was very, very important for Abraham to come out of his native nation and go to another place that God would show him. And we know that as soon as Abraham obeyed God and he went and he ended up in the place, we know that he took his nephew Lot and then they separated and Lot took the plains of Sodom. And the Bible tells us that Abraham lifted up his eyes and he saw the place, the hills, and he went there. And as soon as he got there, God showed himself and he obtained such favor and the blessings of God. So understanding the place is critical. You will never fully operate in full favor and see the multiple blessings of God and be able to walk in sync with God until you have understood the place that you ought to be in. It's possible to be in the wrong place at the wrong time also. When we look at people like Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, before Ruth ever came into the picture, Naomi had come out of her country with her husband, Elimelech, and their two sons. And they had, there was a famine in the country and they decided to relocate to another place called Moab. And while they were there, the Bible tells us that her husband dies, followed by her two sons. And Naomi goes through a horrible, terrible time. Her children have gone. Her sons had married, but they had no children. So she's left there with these two young women, and she doesn't know what to do with them. But I'm grateful because at some point, even through all the hardship and the bitterness and the whatever she was going through, we don't know what she was going through mentally. I'm sure she had a lot of questions. But one time she hears that God has visited his people in Bethlehem, and she gets a revelation to go back to Bethlehem. And the Bible tells us that she tells these two girls to go back, but Ruth chooses to go with her. And as soon as they get back to Bethlehem, as soon as they landed there, literally their lives changed. Their fortunes changed. The things that had become so difficult for them became easy. They began to obtain favor. I think I talked about this also in the video, favor, how to level up in favor. We hear how God comes through using Ruth to bless Naomi. Now, I believe, personally, when I read this story, I believe that Naomi and her husband should have never left her country to go to Moab. If they had stayed put, maybe her husband would never have died. Maybe her 2 sons would never have died. We don't know how the story would have turned out, but she came back with something good. At least she had Ruth. So it's important. We can see that it's very important for us to understand when we should stay put in a place and when we should move. Displacing, when you know that you are a child of destiny and you know that God has a calling on your life and there are things that God has promised to do in your life and through you, you also need to be very careful that you do not go to a place that God did not call you or place you. Very, very critical for you to always be found by God in the right place. We look at people like Joseph. God had shown him in a dream that he would become a great person, but God never told him that it would take a lot before he became a great person. To cut a long story short, we all know the story of Joseph. He ends up in Egypt and he goes through persecution. He goes through Potiphar's house. He ends up in prison and eventually he ends up in the palace, interpreting the dreams for Pharaoh, and Pharaoh obviously promotes him. So he ends up in greatness in a foreign country. Amen and amen. So Joseph had to move from his country to go to Egypt before he could really come into alignment with what God was doing and what God had promised to do in his life. When David fought Goliath, David was a shepherd and he spent most of his days in the wilderness. And on this particular day, David decides to bring food for his brothers and he ends up on the battlefront. There's a lot of confusion. There's this man threatening Israel and nobody knows what to do. David turns up and he offers to fight Goliath. And people are surprised that a young man would even volunteer to fight this giant that was so defiant and that had defeated so many people. But I believe that David knew that his time had come and that he was in the right place at the right time. David understood when he needed to be in the wilderness, and he also understood when it was the time and for him to go to the place that he needed to go for his next promotion. And he fights Goliath and his whole story changes. He was at the right place at the right time. Amen and amen. There was a time that there was a famine in the land and Abraham went down to Egypt. Years later, there was another famine and his son Isaac wanted to go down to Egypt because his father had gone down to Egypt and he had survived and thrived. So Isaac wanted to follow suit, but God appeared to Isaac and told him, no, don't go down to Egypt. You see, sometimes we follow people and we want to do what other people have done because it worked for them. We go to places that other people went because they went and thrived there. But those people thrived there because they were in their rightful season, in the right time, in the right place. But a right place that is a place that is a right place for another person may not be the right place for us. So we need to be very, very discerning to know, where should I be at this time? What should I be doing at this time? Which is the place that God has called me to be in? Because your place of placement will reveal your favor, an abundance of favor. Like we heard, Naomi and Ruth were struggling all the years in Moab. They went through hardship, through so much hardship. But as soon as they left that place to go to Bethlehem, everything changed because they were going to their place of their favor. So your favor is found in the place that God has called you to. Understanding placement is important. Yes, you need to know the times and the seasons, but you also need to know the place that God would have you operate from. God bless you. I would like to ask you a favor. If you have not subscribed to this channel, please feel free to do so. Also, give us a thumbs up and leave us a comment. And if you're able to share this video, help us, please. You would be helping us to share the good news of Jesus Christ and to help somebody else who may be in need of this message. God bless you. It is well. Remember, the place of your placement is as important as understanding times and seasons. Amen and amen.